So welcome to Let's Talk Humanitarian, Parlons Humanitaire, enriching conversations with humanitarian leaders and humanitarian workers to open eyes, hearts, and minds. This is a program by KALU Institute, your online humanitarian aid studies center, where humanitarians train humanitarians. My name is Amélie Yanguifes, and I'm honored to be your host for this conversation with Andrew Harper. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Molly. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. And before we start into a conversation that I believe is going to be really rich and enriching, I'm going to present you briefly what this long career of yours and in major humanitarian crisis. So, Andrew, you are currently the special advisor on climate action to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, known as UNHCR, in Geneva. You're responsible, and you're going to tell us a little more about this role later, but you're responsible for providing strategic guidance, oversight, and expertise to shape UNHCR's response to the climate emergency. Prior to this current task, you were the director of the Division of Program Support and Management, DPSM, where you oversaw program policy, planning, management, as well as technical support to field operations. You've also led the innovation service in UNHCR, and we will want to know a little more about that, about innovation in humanitarian aid. You were responsible for leading and coordinating the international response to the Syrian crisis in Jordan. Some of the main achievements included the largest managing the largest refugee crisis in the world, and the establishment of the Zaatari and Azraq refugee camps, introducing biometric registration and linking that to the world's largest biometric-based refugee cash assistance program. Andrew, you also served as the head of desk for UNHCR, covering Iraq situation, and you've been the emergency focal point for the Middle East and North Africa region for the Libyan crisis. You previously worked also for Australian Embassy in Turkey and OCHA, and various field locations with UNHCR, Central and Southeast Asia, Western Balkans, Islamic Republic of Iran, and Ukraine. So we can say a life really much dedicated to UNHCR. Yeah.
It also shows how old I am as well.
we don't get onto that topic. So what makes you so passionate about UNHCR?
Well, I think it's like if you just sort of go through what you've said, and again, one thing is you have to emphasize from the start, none of this is an individual. Everything is about working together with others. All you can do is contribute to a much bigger effort, because the issues out there are just so huge that as soon as you start talking about individuals, then you start sort of almost losing that the need for that holistic approach. And I think one of the key things which I love about my work is that you're always working in a team. And it's not just, for instance, within UNHCR, but it's also within the wider humanitarian field, but also the governments and most importantly, the people on the ground. And if you look at UNHCR's mandate, which is to provide protection and assistance to those people who are most vulnerable because they've had to flee from their homes, there's no better mandate than to, and I always sort of see the word protect as almost like a bit patronizing, but like to work with people to find solutions for them, to find a way in which they can move forward, and also to work with the host communities who are often neglected when we're talking about refugee situations, because without the host communities and the governments, there wouldn't be a place of asylum. So there has to be, you have to be passionate, you have to be enthusiastic about what you do, because you won't make a difference. So it's sort of hand in glove almost. If you're not passionate, if you're not willing to sort of like be on the front lines and committed to be accountable too, because you have to take responsibility. You can't be a bystander in these sort of situations. So that would be some of the elements why I'm passionate about it.
Beautiful. Thank you for starting and sharing with us your passion and your enthusiasm, energy, commitment, and that's so important. Yes, in that work. So you've worked many years on the Syria crisis, and you have many insights to share with us. But I mean, it could take us the whole day, and that would be glad to do that. But you don't have that time, and I would like to ask about what we mentioned in your bio. It's this biometric registration of refugees. Can you tell us about how did it start? How did we link it to the bigger picture and to the cash assistance program? Tell us more about this and what it has meant not only for Syria but in the bigger picture of the humanitarian world.
Yeah, well, I think like biometrics has been around for some time, but I don't think it was fully, let's say, grasped as an integral part of accountability for humanitarian systems. And I think when we start looking at like innovations or ways in which we can do things better, we can't sort of come in with an approach which is we've got the solution. You have to look around at what is available and build upon that. And in the case of Jordan had a biometric system which they're using at the airports as people were coming into, and they would be screened. So like, we were having 5,000 people crossing the border per night. And like that's a lot of people. That was basically we're having to mobilize 80 buses to move people from the barbed wire to the refugee camp. And we had to find a way in which we could streamline the process of registration. We weren't so much interested in getting the names right, but we wanted to make sure that we could identify the unique identity. And that at a later point, we could then sort of catch up and get more details and information. But having that unique identity and then moving them into shelter was critically important, not only for us, but for also the Jordanian government, because how UNHCR works and how the UN works is based on trust and credibility. And what we wanted to demonstrate to the government was that we knew exactly who was coming into the country and we could link them up at a later point. And it was quite interesting too, so that, one, we used existing technology, which was in Jordan, but we brought it to scale. We did it in collaboration with the government, so they were confident in what we were doing. But there was a lot of, let's say, skepticism from everyone who was saying the Syrians will not want to be registered using biometrics. They won't turn up. They won't want their details taken into account. Basically, the next day, once we started and put out a broadcast saying that we want to register people using biometrics, we had 5,000 Syrians, 10,000 Syrians lining up outside our offices being registered. They wanted to be registered. They wanted to be taken into account. They wanted to see that they were being, that there was a degree of protection being put in place for them. So the issue was making sure that we had a streamlined system in place that we could be also accountable. And what it did lead to was increasing trust from the refugees as well as the government, because we could say to the refugees that we want to make sure that the assistance that we're providing goes to the right person. Yeah. We're not paying one person 5 times or 6 times, which has often happened in past situations where people would come in with fraudulent documents. This time, you couldn't have a fraudulent document because we were looking at the digital information from your scanning from your irises. So within let's say a month or so, we're able to find that we were making savings of something like 30% in regards to our cash assistance and the distribution of non-food items like blankets, because we're providing the assistance that people deserved once. And so that meant that there wasn't sort of like this black market of excess goods going around. And so after that, other agencies started piggybacking onto the system, and it just started getting more and more engaged. And I think one of the positive things is it accelerated the involvement of the use of biometrics as a means to be accountable for not only the registration, but for the distribution of assistance. And that meant that governments were more trustworthy of UNHCR to provide that assistance, because I was extremely confident that there was, I wouldn't say never any sort of diversion, but I was pretty confident that we were doing everything that we possibly could to be accountable for the resources that were entrusted to us.
Well, I love hearing how the use of technology enabled us not only to be more efficient in the delivery of humanitarian aid, and that people who need it get it absolutely, and also for accountability, acceptance, and ownership, by the hosts and by the different
Emily, if I could also
stakeholders.
add one more. If I can also add one more thing, which was also the resettlement side of things too, because what we wanted to do was from the point that we registered a refugee and determined that they were in need of resettlement to the point of their departure, we knew it was the same person. And so at a time of increasing hesitance from resettlement countries to make sure that we were sending the right people, that was also really important, that we had that trust from the time the refugee arrived to the time they departed, that we could actually be 100% confident that it was the same person.
Well, and how long did it take? I mean, to get it functional?
Well, again, like Jordan was fantastic in regards to the fact that the system was developed in Jordan. It's been sold elsewhere around the world. There was a very educated population within Jordan that we were able to tap into for our staff. We had something like 400 staff working. So when you have 5,000 people coming across the border per night, you need to have an equivalent infrastructure. I think we had about 100 iris scanning sets in various offices. So it's a huge logistical operation, so that you had to set up this infrastructure at the point where refugees entered, also at the refugee camp, and also in the major urban centres. So I'd say probably 2 months, maybe 1 month, 2 months. So it was pretty quick.
Wow, very quick, yeah.
And then we transfer, because we also, often people sort of see the UN or humanitarian agencies as like not necessarily at the cutting edge. We have to be not only at the cutting edge, we have to be ahead of the cutting edge.
Yeah.
we have
show the way. Yeah.
Yeah, we have to sort of try new ways of working because lives are depending on it. And so we can't sort of spend a year or 2 years piloting and checking through the processes. We sometimes have to, let's say, push the initiative more than is generally accepted over.
Yeah, I love that. And you believe this system that has been set up and this experience is easily exportable to other contexts?
Yes, definitely. So but again, this is something which we established, was it 2014, 15? So it's like technology improves. The system and thinking still is applicable. And the other very useful thing too was that if somebody was registered in Jordan and then they moved to Egypt, it would take basically half a second for the operation in Egypt to find out that that person had been previously registered in Jordan. And so we had, I know like the teams, like our teams did a fantastic job, because during the 2015, 2016 refugee influx into Europe, supposed influx into Europe, Jordan had many more, as Lebanon and everyone else, but the influx according to Europe, we had ministers and prime ministers coming from Europe and sort of saying, okay, like, why can't the EU do something similar? Like, why can't we have a good a system for registration and tracking assistance as what has been put in place in Jordan and subsequently in Lebanon and other locations? So, it can be, and you see how quickly technology is being developed and being used around the world. Like the computer that you've probably got now, maybe, has probably got some sort of biometric system which you can open it with. So it's more about how do you utilize, not only utilizing technology for your own benefit, but what are the problems and challenges that you're being confronted with on a daily basis, and then searching for that technology. So it's you're putting the problem and challenges up front, and then saying, okay, how are we going to resolve this? And so that then sort of opens and broadens your horizon in relation to what can be the solutions that you're after, and then you can start challenging people and sort of saying, oh, don't tell me the technology does not exist to solve this problem. It's mainly the will. Sometimes it's the security element to it or regulations. but the needs are there, the technology is there, and I dare say the money is there. You just have to try and link it all together.
That's a great transition to a question I wanted to ask you about when your times when you led on innovation at the innovation department in UNHCR. So I guess technology is part of this innovation, but there's more to it. So tell us a little about what is your innovation for UNHCR?
Well, I think innovation is, and everyone is innovative to some extent, because innovation means looking at doing things differently and doing things better. I think and I must say that was probably my most favourite job in my entire career with UNHCR. Just being able to think differently, working particularly with very young, dynamic people who are sort of thinking, okay, why are we doing it this way? It doesn't make any sense, and because that's just the way the UN works. But we should never accept things and say this is how things should continue to work. We should always be challenging and saying it doesn't make sense. Let's try and look for something better. So innovation means different things to different people. I just keep it very simple and say let's look at doing things differently. Let's looking at doing things ground up, like asking the communities what are the challenges that they've got, and trying to address them. And most importantly, having an impact. As soon as people start saying, we're going to have an innovation conference, I'll just say, there is so, every year or two, you have a particular theme where everyone says we need to have a conference, and then you have 30 conferences. That innovation is not about conferences. Innovation is doing some things differently at the ground level. And I think one thing which was particularly enlightening during, let's say, the 2016, 2017 and beyond, was that there was this fixation on providing apps in order to support refugees moving to Europe. That is not the approach. What you need to do is look at what are the refugees using and what is the information that they're looking for. And so, because you can look at developing an app, and it may or may not be used, but you can look at what is refugees using. Are they using WhatsApp? Are they using Signal? Are they using Facebook? And that way you then sort of, you're taking note and you're reinforcing the key communication modules that refugees are using. So you're working with them rather than forcing something which is top down. So that's something which I think is particularly important, is that you look at the context and you work with that. You focus on the impact, you focus on the timeliness, and so some of the most important innovations are the simplest ones.
Yeah.
So don't go too sophisticated. Don't go too technical. Don't think that everyone has got an Apple iPhone 12 in the Sahel. What is it? So the transfer of funds, for instance, using mobile apps, MTN in East Africa, that's a great innovation. Empowering, quick. Anyway, lots of things go on.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing in this, and especially, giving us this advice. But let's keep it simple. It's about thinking differently and involving, and this is true because we all this is a true participation of people. When we look at what are their needs, what do they use, and often in our projects we speak about participation of beneficiaries, and we don't really know how it happens really. But what you've just mentioned, and how you look at what they do, how they do it, and you build upon that to deliver a better humanitarian aid, then that makes much more sense in terms of having people involved in what is meant for them.
Can I just say, because this is, I'm going to keep talking, about participation is really important too, because often what happens when people go to refugee settlements or urban environments and they look for participation, they take the ones who can speak English or who are very, let's say, alpha oriented, like they're the first ones to step up. They may have linkages to the authorities. That's not what's important. What is important is going to what we'd say the back of the tent.
Yeah.
Right. What about the situation of the elderly? What about the situation of the pregnant women, conservative groups, indigenous groups? Like, take the time to go to the back of the tent, go to the furthest away, the ones who do not want to speak, and sort of say, why, like, what is the situation that you're facing? And
Yeah.
it's only that, like, if you just go to a refugee camp or a refugee settlement or go to an NGO centre and just talk to the people who are working there, that's not necessarily reflective of where the true needs are.
Yeah. I love your expression, go to the back of the tent. That's something that we will keep. Yeah, thank you so much. I wanted to ask you about the comprehensive refugee response framework. Now you understand it's 5 years old. Can you tell us a little about what it is for some people
Mm-hmm.
maybe who watching us and are not aware of it, and a little share with us what has happened in these 5 years, what has worked, which impact are you seeing, and how are you going to continue move forward with this framework, or what are the changes that are going to be made, adjustments?
Okay, I think it's a good point because it is 5 years ago, and I think this week also demonstrates several unfortunate anniversaries, including Yemen and Syria.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, what the CRF meant to achieve, or is achieving, is a different way of working, where it's not just focused on a refugee response, which is important. It's a much more comprehensive response. You're looking at the overall needs of the community, including, most importantly, the host community, and then radiating out to the region and to the country itself, and working much more in sync with development actors and peace building and security. So it's not just about UNHCR providing assistance and protection with NGOs. It's about how can we work towards a much more comprehensive framework, a much more comprehensive response, so that our engagement also links in with the development needs of the community, and so that we can also access or solicit much larger funding and support, including from the World Bank. And I would say that's probably been one of the biggest successes that we have achieved, is that we're working much closer with development actors, the World Bank, other international financial institutions, also civil society as well, and the private sector. I think the private sector is also... Yeah. I've actually got to do a presentation later today to private sector. So the fact that we're much more engaged about that a refugee situation is not just a humanitarian situation, but it also links into development and peace building and security is critically important. What has happened after that as well has been that you've had the Global Compact on Refugees, which was basically signed off by the General Assembly, and the Global Refugee Forum as well, which is aimed to move forward beyond the CRF and to start setting targets for what engagement with the development sector and the private sector actually means. So I think that the fact that we are more and more focused on not just refugee camps, but also supporting the settlements is really important.
Yeah, and I loved when you mentioned the private sector. Can you tell us a little more how the private sector is getting involved in?
Well, the private sector is if we're serious about making a sustainable long-term difference, then humanitarians are often sort of like very focused short-term in our response, because it's often limited to humanitarian response. Then you have development actors who come in to support the government and infrastructure. But if you actually want to have something which is sustainable for the long term, you need to have it cost recovery. You need to have investments. You need to be looking at livelihoods that can continue to provide support for generations. Yeah. So it's recognition that if you only look at a humanitarian or development response, it's not going to lead really anywhere. You need to demonstrate that refugees and the host communities are also a market. So what is it that we can have a win-win situation? So I'll give you an example in northern Uganda, in Bidi Bidi, where there was, let's say, 400,000 people crossed into the north of Uganda, and there was a major need for internet access because people wanted to be able to communicate. The challenge was that there's obviously no internet connectivity up there,
Yeah.
but there was a demand. And so what would normally happen is that UNHCR, our partners, would spend hundreds of thousands of dollars putting up internet towers and paying for the security and the fuel and everything else. But that's not a sustainable option.
Yeah.
So what the team did, actually the innovation team, they actually went to with our colleagues in Kampala, went to the mobile network providers in Kampala and said, we've got a business opportunity for you. And so four telecoms operators went up to Bidi Bidi, went, nah, it's not viable. But then we facilitated a market survey, and the market survey said that people were willing to spend $1.50 or $2 per month on internet. And then the companies basically did the maths in their mind and went, actually, that's a lot of money if you start talking about 50 to 100,000 families. And so all of a sudden, we had 2 or 3 companies move up to the north and provide internet facilities, and they had a cost recovery within maybe 6 months or 9 months from their initial investment. So that's the type of things which we focused on the outcome, which was providing communications.
Yeah.
We didn't have to take responsibility of setting up the infrastructure, and the communications fitted into the existing infrastructure of Uganda. So this is where it's about empowering rather than creating a dependency on populations. But then we've obviously got to work with the government to make sure they've got licenses and everything like that. But that's just an example.
Wow, what a beautiful success story. Now I'm hearing sustainability, partnership, empowerment, and going back to normal, to normal life. And excellent.
Well, I think it's sort of like just put yourself in a position that you're a refugee and you've got a family. Like, all you want to do is to go back to a sense of normality.
Yeah.
In this period of COVID, this is what we all want. Like, we can.
Yes.
we as a species, we're very adaptable. Like, we prefer to be a place where we've originated from. But if we can't, just give us the means to move on with our lives and with dignity, so that we can also contribute. Not only sort of provide support to our own families, but the communities that have also provided us with protection.
I love what you've just mentioned. Now that is true in those times of COVID, we all of us have this need. No, so let's see if we connect with this need of going back to something we knew, and that helps us to enhance our empathy. Towards people who are going through many changes due to conflict or other situations in their lives. So to close, to finalize this interview, and I would like that you tell us a little more about your role, your current role. So what is it, climate action in UNHCR?
You sort of outlined it very well at the beginning. Like, I can sort of go through the theory of it, providing strategic guidance and all that. But what it basically means is that the biggest threat that we all are facing at the moment is climate. And the extreme climatic conditions that are going to increasingly prevail in every aspect of the world. And so, as a refugee agency, as a protection agency, we have to increasingly be aware, cognizant of the fact that climate is going to be an increasing driver of forced displacement. So my role is not only to bring all the different elements involved with climate and environment and energy together within UNHCR, but I would say also raise the ambition that we have to be increasingly prepared for, unfortunately, increased vulnerability of populations. So already there's 3 times as many people being forced from their homes due to extreme weather events linked to climate rather than conflict. So it's already a key driver. We're also finding that 90% of refugees around the world originate from a country which is classed as either vulnerable or extremely vulnerable to climatic conditions. So it just makes sense that we're very much engaged in this area. So we've got a strategic framework which we put together in the last 12 months, which is based on 3 pillars. The first one is to look at the doctrinal, legalistic protection side, like what are the legal instruments available for people who have been forced to leave from their homes. And we're not looking to create new instruments, we're not looking to expand mandates, but we're trying to do a stock take of what applies. And thankfully, particularly in regions such as Africa, we've got the OAU Convention, the Organisation of African Union Convention. They already take into account disasters, disaster displacement as an expanded definition for refugee status. Also in Latin America as well, the Cartagena Declaration. So, yeah. And the second element is how can we be doing a better job to reduce the impact on the environment in refugee locations? How can we reduce the reliance on biofuel, biomass? How can we be much more environmentally savvy? So where we're putting our camps, but also working with cities as well, which are particularly important because that's where the vast majority of refugees are located. And the third pillar is how can UNHCR do a better job? How can we reduce the carbon? How can we, I think we've got about 4,000 diesel generators around the world. So why do we have diesel generators? How can we start working, for instance, with the private sector to stop paying for diesel and start providing using photovoltaic cells? How can we reduce the numbers of cars that we're using in the field? Maybe joining with other agencies. So again, questioning everything that we're currently doing and trying to make decisions based on being seen through an environmental lens.
Thank you. So a lot of innovation I hear that will need to be, I mean, is part of this role also in this department. Thank you so much, Andrew, for all that. So as a final word, I have 2 small, more personal questions. I wanted to know, have you ever dreamed or considered doing something else?
Well, I actually went to university to study forestry.
Yes.
so that was my So one of the reasons why I might be so interested in the environment is that I was very much interested in doing forestry when I first started university, but then I transferred to economics. But after joining, after starting in this sort of in the humanitarian world, like there's just nothing which comes close to it. This has to be one of the best jobs in the world, particularly when you look at climate and refugees. Like there is nothing more interesting and more pressing and more important.
Yeah. And if with all these years of experience, all these different contexts and all your passion, if you were to give a piece of advice to our students of the Master on Humanitarian Aid, the KALU students, what would be this one piece of advice you would like to share? I
think, it may sound simple, but remain principled. If there is an option between taking the easy way or the hard way, and the hard way is the right way, take that. Also, again, question the need for endless meetings. Question the need for, why does the meeting have to be for an hour? Why do you have to sort of focus on process? We have to be the most important element is impact. So if you're working in a humanitarian field, you should not be responding or setting yourself to account to your boss or to your supervisor or to your donor. Your chief person is the person on the ground who's relying upon you. I remember when I first joined UNHCR, that there was which was many years ago, there was a slogan which says, the voice for the voiceless. That really has to be the focus. If we were talking to a refugee, would we be proud of what we're doing or not? And I think there was, I remember when, in some of the emergencies that not only I've been involved in, but obviously my colleagues are still much involved in, you'd be sort of working on the weekends and you'd be trying to contact somebody in headquarters and they've taken the weekend off. They're working, in the field, you don't, you work because refugees don't have a weekend off. They're refugees. So having this mindset of being accountable and responsible, or responsible again is a bit paternalistic, but sort of you have an obligation to be front and center with the people that are there on the front lines.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for this inspiration. Thank you for your time, for all what you shared with us in terms of knowledge and this commitment that is contagious. So thank you very much, Andrew, for this time with us.
Thank you for your time too. Thank you for the interest.
Thank you. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.